We need to double the size of our industrial plant. Every inflationary thing from the last 70 years is being repeated now, and every disinflationary thing from the last 40 years is now flipping on its head. So we were always, with the rebuilding, with the demographic shift, with deglobalization, we were always going to have an inflationary pulse here, and it is going to last until such time that we probably double our industrial base. I don't see that process being done until at least 2027. So regardless of what Trump or Biden do or don't do, this is the macroeconomic environment now. Mm-hmm. And there's not a lot that the government can do to make it better. Oh, they can certainly make it worse, but there's not a lot they can do to make it better. And we were always going to get here. Well, Afghanistan has only been a country in time periods when every country around them has been in breakdown. As long as there is a Pakistan and a Uzbekistan and a Iran, you should not expect Afghanistan to be a functional state. So it's going back to what it was more or less in the 90s. Whether or not the Taliban is the dominant power over time, that is subject to all kinds of cross currents. I don't want to make a forecast on that, but it's certainly not going to be what we would consider to be a normal place. For the Middle East writ large, if you eliminate the administrative staff in Doha and the special forces in Syria, we're already gone. Mm-hmm. Troops in Iraq, there's a few there in an advisory role, but you're talking in the hundreds. We don't have anyone in Saudi Arabia. We don't have anyone in all those supply lines we had to get stuff into Iraq or into Afghanistan. Those are all closed down. So the Fifth Fleet is no longer hanging out in Bahrain. The French typically now have more ships in the Persian Gulf than we do. We're done. That's good and bad. For us, we're obviously like, woohoo, shale revolution, we don't care. And, that's exciting after 15 years of crap in the Middle East. But if you're anyone else, this is a bit of a problem, because the Iranians and the Saudis have some very strong opinions about who should be in charge in that part of the world. And if the United States is not there keeping them separate or picking sides, I expect this to boil up into another crisis on a scale roughly similar to that of the Ukraine war. And while Ukraine going offline is bad for agriculture in so many ways, obviously the Persian Gulf going offline, even in part, is horrendous for energy prices. And so we're going to be entering a world in the not too distant future where just the Ukraine war takes us above 170. But if we get a few things popping off in the Persian Gulf, 200 is going to seem cheap. It's everything right now. I mean, demographics moves really slowly until it doesn't. And so from the start of my professional career in 1992 until 2 years ago, it's like, I can see this coming. I can see this getting closer. I can see everyone pretending that it's just going to be more of the same. Now we're here. And I am seeing those and echoes of the demographic collapse in almost everything that is going on right now. That's everything from the American culture war to the Ukraine war to what's going on with COVID in China. At the core, it's a shortage of workers. It's a shortage of consumers, and very soon a shortage of capital. And that is coloring everything that is going on. I don't see it as making America more vulnerable, but certainly more distracted and less capable of doing something internationally. Now, if our economy was dependent on international connections, this would be a big problem, but it's not. So the culture war, what's the best way to phrase this? This isn't new, and it's not just this decade. Social media makes it seem bigger than it is, and certainly shortens the time that it takes for people to blow their fuses. But our political system is in a period of reorganization. We have a two-party system with a first past the post network for selecting electors. Take away the fancy word, and what that means is, in order to win, you have to get one more vote than the other guy. And in that environment, you're naturally going to have only two parties, because you want to throw as wide of a net as possible. And that's why the Democratic Party and the Republican parties traditionally have been such big organizations tapping different factions. So like on the Democratic side, you've got minorities, you've got college professors, you've got urban dwellers, you've got single women. These groups don't have a lot in common on the surface, but the Democrats have built them into an electoral alliance that has the single largest chunk of votership in America. But when you have change in geopolitics and demographics and technology, the factions move around. Some of them jump ship, others come in. And if you look at the last 30 years, We've had the end of the Cold War. We've had the rise of uber globalization, now the collapse of globalization. We've had the baby boomers be the primary consumers, and now they're moving into mass retirement. Of course, this was a time when the factions were going to move, and Trump is representative of that. And so the factions are moving around, and when the factions are moving around, they have to shout to be heard, because if they get left outside of a party, being a swing voter in the United States is not all that much fun, because you don't get to decide any of the platforms. And so nobody wants to be left out, but that doesn't mean everybody wants to be in the coalition they're in or have been in for the last 30 years. The last time the United States went through one of these reshufflings, it was the 1920s and 30s. We had the Great Depression, we had World War II, and it took 12 years for the parties to settle into the forms that we have now. African Americans all used to be Republicans. Big business all used to be Democrats. So we'll get through this. Wow, is it messy? I'm not sure it's going to be there. But that goes for socialism and fascism too. All of our economic models are based on the idea that the pie is going to get a little bit bigger. And without population growth, that is no longer guaranteed. And we're already seeing contractions in significant parts of the world. Europe's probably furthest furthest along in this. I think China is going to be a hard second. And in a world where the pie shrinks, we're in a world of less, we need a new economic theory. Now, in North America, because of demographics in the US and Mexico, we are the place where that's least true. Our demographics are still aging, but we're not going to age into a situation of China or Germany within 30 years. It's more like 50 years, maybe. And that assumes our birth rate never comes back up, which it may. So we get to watch everyone else deal with this. And I know that sounds like all wonky and boring, but keep in mind that the last major conflicts we've had, the Cold War, the World Wars, the German reunification wars, economic theory was one of the big bases for all of that. And to think that everyone in the world is just going to figure out what the next thing is 500 years after this thing on their first try, I'm not that optimistic. The how you manage an economy determines who is who in your society, and that is worth fighting for. So I can see us having conflicts internal and multi-state over how economics works now that we are in a world of less. Sure. So the website is zeihan.com. That's where you can sign up for the newsletter. It is free. It will always be free. And we're doing all kinds of things right now because of the Ukraine war. And then, of course, the new book drops in June, and its title is The End of the World is Just the Beginning. We all need to get used to a faster pace of change, but ultimately, what is going to allow us to get through this is building out that industrial plant. So one of the things that I'm really impressed by the United States' capacity to do is not at the national level, it's at the state and local level of cities taking their futures into their own hands and going out and finding their own investors or building their own infrastructure or partnering with other cities and other states. We have a great record of doing that in the United States, and the communities that are better at doing that are the ones who are going to be able to write the future.